Welcome to Edison Open House Global Healthcare 2021. In this session, we're highlighting the work of Tryp Therapeutics. It's a company that identifies and develops clinical stage compounds for orphan diseases and other conditions with high unmet medical need. I'm joined by their president, James Gilligan, and their CEO, Jim Koo. Jim, tell me briefly a bit more about the company.
Yeah, thank you, Vivienne. So this is Jim Koo here. I'm the CEO of the company, and I want to begin by thanking Edison for the opportunity to present here. This is our first time, and we look forward to coming back in subsequent years to update people on our progress. So your question about what is our company is very relevant. Our strategy is to identify drug development opportunities that address unmet medical needs. We aim to be either first in class or best in class with our drugs. And we focus on drugs that have pre-existing safety and in some instances, efficacy data. Our initial focus is on treating eating disorders and chronic neuropathic pain. Specifically regarding eating disorders, we're focused on rare eating disorders that currently have no therapies. You probably haven't heard of them. We expect to make announcements about what they are shortly. But in general, it's much easier to get a drug approved when you're targeting an orphan disease where there's no other therapy. You can just run a smaller clinical trial in that particular indication to show efficacy. And while the market opportunity may be smaller in size, we plan to conduct phase 4 studies to widen the label. And for those people concerned that maybe our market size is a little bit too small, let me say, if you step back a little bit and look at eating disorders overall in totality, they're perhaps the largest unexploited pharmaceutical market out there. So really market size shouldn't be a concern. Our focus in pain is in something called neuropathic pain, and that's where the pain originates directly from the nervous system itself. There's no external source of the pain, like what might happen with soft tissue injury from trauma or burn. In particular, our lead indication is fibromyalgia, which is chronic pain that is experienced throughout the body. The numbers on fibromyalgia are really quite staggering. Up to 4% of the population affected. In the US, that translates to about 5 million people. The market size is estimated to be 3.6 billion in 2026. And about 30% of these fibromyalgia patients actually take opioids for their pain, so it's highly underserved.
So fibromyalgia wasn't even recognized as a condition until relatively recently. So it really is an underserved condition, and it's great to hear that you're looking into it. James Gilligan, can you tell me a bit more about the technology platform and the targets of your drugs?
Sure, thank you, Vivienne. As Jim mentioned previously, Tryp's philosophy is to look at drugs that have a de-risk profile, which means that they have some level of proven efficacy and safety. And then we look at these molecules to address unmet medical needs. Our lead program is the PFM program, which stands for psilocybin for psychiatric disorders. And this program scientifically looks at the clinical utility of synthetic psilocybin in a variety of areas, but our key focuses are in eating disorders and neuropathic pain. We take a very scientific approach to try to look at information that's available in the literature and other clinical studies to inform us on how to approach these particular disorders, eating disorders and fibromyalgia. If we think about some of the success psilocybin has had in treatment-resistant depression, for example, you can look that there's a neuropsychiatric component. And as you mentioned with fibromyalgia, there's the thought that, again, the pain emanates from the brain. And so therefore, in combination, if we use psilocybin in combination with psychotherapy, we feel that this has a very good chance of providing clinical benefit to these patients who, as you've mentioned, have been desperate and resorted to the use of opioids and other drugs which have not really been beneficial. The other thing I would say, and we might touch on this a little later, is that we're trying to get more towards the root cause of the pain and not just treating the symptoms that patients feel.
Psilocybin, of course, people may be more familiar with as a recreational drug. What's the data been so far with your lead program?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we look at psilocybin, and you're absolutely right, there was a lot of research back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and then that was dampened a bit due to recreational use. But if we look at more recent work in things like PTSD and treatment-resistant depression, there is more recent clinical data to support its clinical utility. And one of the examples I like to use actually is phantom limb pain, because it's a little bit easier to understand how that pain would emanate from the brain and not from the periphery. Jim mentioned, typically we think of pain where you burn yourself or something falls on your fingers. Here in a situation with phantom limb pain, unfortunately, people who have had an amputation, usually due to traumatic injury, have consistent pain in a limb that doesn't exist. So it's easy to understand, therefore, that the pain has to be originating in the brain. And we think this is similar in conditions such as fibromyalgia. So this approach by using a psychedelic agent, safe psychedelic agent such as psilocybin, in conjunction with psychotherapy, has great promise for treating these patients.
So presumably you're going to start off with just a few patients, and then what are you going to do next? Proof of concept clinical studies?
Yeah, that's a great point. What we want to do is start slowly and do some preliminary studies, pilot studies in a very controlled environment. And that will allow us to refine our approach in a larger patient population and enhance this likelihood of success that we'll have in that patient population. This is very cutting edge, and there's not a lot of existing data on exactly how to perform these studies. And so we want to spend some time to do it correctly and leverage the information we get from those pilot studies in our future studies.
What sort of data do you need to be on the path to success?
So that's a great question. In some of the studies, like for example, the eating disorders, the people that we're working with have tremendous experience in these areas. And the experience dictates that their approaches have not been successful. Everything they've tried has failed. And so in a pilot study, even with perhaps maybe only 10 patients, we can count on these experts when they use our approach with the combination of psychotherapy and psilocybin to give us a qualitative response and say, hey, we've seen really good response in these patients. And it may not meet what you statistically look for, like a p-value of 0.05 or 0.01, but the folks that we're working with would give us great confidence that they're seeing some clinical benefit with our treatment paradigm.
Jim, what does the market you're targeting look like, and what are the competitors? Although I'm imagining for fibromyalgia, apart from opioids, there isn't much of a competition.
Yeah, thanks, Vivienne, for that question. So one of the key tenets of our company is we focus on highly underserved pharmaceutical markets. Eating disorders and chronic pain are really very poorly treated currently. And we believe that we can be first in class or best in class in those areas. So in reference to fibromyalgia, there are 3 approved therapies out there already. They are given to patients, but they don't have much efficacy in that particular patient population. And also they have terrible side effects as well. So the population of fibromyalgia patients are greatly dissatisfied, and that's why they turn to opioids in a lot of cases.
What are the milestones that investors should be looking out for over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, some of the announcements you could expect to see from us in the next actually several weeks are announcements about institutions and investigators that we are working with, patent filings, regulatory filings, research findings that we will put out, partnerships that are going to be established, clinical trial results. And all these events are currently being teed up, so roll out in the next few weeks.
And what about your partnership strategy? Would you be looking to market these medicines yourself, or will you partner up with someone else?
Yeah, we are highly receptive to partnerships being a company that's based in North America, we don't really have the resources to do global drug development, yet our product opportunities are receptive to patients all throughout the world. So we're very open to working with partners to develop our drugs, particularly overseas, outside of North America.
And when do you anticipate reaching market?
So another key aspect of our strategy is we want to be first in class to the market. And that's why we've chosen those areas that we have. We believe that we are the leaders. We believe there's minimal competition for our particular approach. We think that's very important to be first in class or best in class to a particular market. That's one of the dictums of the pharmaceutical industry for success, either be first in class or best in class for your particular market. And so we purposely chosen, as I mentioned, in certain cases, orphan or rare diseases where the path to approval is much accelerated.
And how much cash runway do you have, and what kind of funding are you seeking?
Yeah, so we raised enough to begin our initial drug development activities and become publicly traded. We expect to raise further funding as we meet our milestones and we make announcements about those. So it'll be a perpetual process for us. We didn't take the strategy of just raising a large pool of capital and then seeing how things go, but it'll be contingent upon our success in the marketplace.
James Gilligan, 2020 has been a very difficult year for many people. How are you looking forward to 2021 as far as Tryp is concerned?
Well, you're absolutely right. 2020 has been difficult. And I think it is a tremendous compliment to the healthcare industry and how quickly we've gone forward with the development of vaccines. And I think that that's just been a tremendous achievement. And from a Tryp standpoint, we're ideally positioned right now with a number of initiatives, as Jim related to, where we have some very near-term opportunities with leading institutions to move quickly into clinical studies. And so we think that there'll be a number of significant achievements in 2021 for Tryp that we're really looking forward to. You'll see we have just great teams that we're pulling together, and there'll be a lot to see from Tryp in 2021.
Jim Koo, James Gilligan, thank you so much, both of you, for talking to us today.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much.